Even granite is no match for the power of frozen water. Over thousands of years, the ice has torn it to pieces. There have been times when ice covered much of the northern hemisphere. I've flown across 3,000 miles of land that was once an icy void. As that ice sheet retreated, it left behind fractured mountains and lakes all across North America. Like this one in Minnewaska Park in New York State. When the ice retreated for the final time at the end of the last ice age, it left behind sky lakes like this one. It's the power of ice that's able to tear up huge amounts of debris, leaving giant gouges that eventually fill with snow melt and rainwater. The ice sheets carve out the Great Lakes, but if you think they're big, look at this beast. This is Lake Agassiz. It covered 135,000 square miles. From what is now Minnesota to Ontario, Canada, and contained 1.5 times more water than the 5 Great Lakes combined. But its days were numbered. The problem was that all the water was held back by a dam made of ice, until finally, 8,200 years ago, it broke at the base, rising to the surface, releasing a huge wall of water that went all the way out into the sea.
Trillions of gallons rushed out in a giant flood, the largest in the last 100,000 years. Large enough to redraw the map of the world and change the course of human history. A flood so great that its story may live on in the book of Genesis.
We fought. We got a sledgehammer, mate.
When the last ice age came to an end around 12,000 years ago, meltwater collected in vast lakes all over North America. The biggest was Lake Agassiz.
We'll head out to the site then.
When the ice dam holding this massive lake burst, a huge volume of water, equivalent to the amount all the world's rivers pour into the oceans each year, surged into the Atlantic.
The end of the last ice age affected people living all over the planet. Trillions of gallons of water had been locked up in these ice sheets covering the northern and southern hemispheres. And as all that water melted, it had to go somewhere.
I'm in the English Channel between Great Britain and France to find out what happened when all that meltwater poured into the Atlantic Ocean. Marine archaeologist Gary Mumba says he can show me a clue. "30 feet down, we reach the bottom. The visibility here is notoriously poor. But then shapes begin to emerge. Preserved in the silt and salt water for 8,000 years are the remains of a mighty forest. Years of painstaking archaeological research tells us there's something even more extraordinary hidden in the trees. I'm looking at what appears to be the timber foundations of a prehistoric building.
This place is a lost world. It used to be a thriving settlement, home to dozens of people. This is where they built their boats for fishing and transport. Now it's nothing more than an eerie Stone Age shrine. It shows how fragile life is against the power of the planet.
Artifacts excavated by Gary show this was once a working boatyard with charcoal fire pits and Stone Age tools.
We got plenty of pieces of charcoal.
8,000-year-old charcoal.
But the place is covered with them in distinct areas. These little pieces of flints, we found hundreds of these. And if we look at this piece of timber here, by itself it doesn't look much. But this was just a shape you get in a logboat.
The logboat would have looked something like this, but it was never finished.
Something happened for them to sort of give up on this particular bit of engineering and leave it where it was.
By dating the sediment layers, Gary has calculated that the boat and the builder's yard were abandoned around 8,200 years ago, coinciding with the Great Flood from Lake Agassiz. As the water rose, the boat builders and their families fled, leaving their tools and their unfinished boat to the mercy of the waves.
What would it have been like for the people here?
Well, it would have been quite shocking because you were so used to the tides, the ebb and flow of the tide on a daily basis. Then all of a sudden, the tide would just kept coming in. So it would have been frightening, it would have changed the landscape and taken land away from them.
The rising waters from the Atlantic raced down from the north, flooding the lowlands and cutting off Britain from mainland Europe. It reshaped the land, ultimately creating the English Channel and the famous White Cliffs of Dover. Britain became an island. But the flood waters didn't stop there. The water travelled on through the Mediterranean and carved out the Black Sea. It was an epic, perhaps even biblical flood. It devastated the region. And some researchers think it's the inspiration for the story of Noah's Ark and other ancient tales of catastrophic floods.
The flooding transformed the entire region and displaced the farming communities that were living around the freshwater lake. They moved towards Western Europe, a place that was traditionally inhabited by hunter-gatherers, and they brought their farming practices with them.
Farming spread rapidly throughout Europe. A flood caused by melting ice changed the planet and the course of human history.
The end of the last ice age transformed our planet and ushered in a new era in its history. And in just 12,000 years, we have had an impact on every part of it, from the land to the sea to the atmosphere.
Human activities are disrupting the cycles of warming and cooling that have always been part of our planet. Where would we be without these normal cycles? When the ice comes and goes, it leaves a trail of destruction. But without that process, can there be life?
On Saturday, July 12th.